welcome everyone to ICUJP for February 21st, 2025. We're grateful every one of you is here and those watching a recording of this event. We're grateful that anybody takes the time to join us. It's very important. We've got an important speaker today, as well as a reflection from Jasmine. I hope we see her on the screen shortly. I am Steve Rohde, chair of this wonderful organization, which has been doing this work for 24 years, founded shortly after 9/11, in the wake of the attacks on the United States, followed by an overwhelming shock and awe in Afghanistan and Iraq that launched the so-called War on Terror. Our founder, George Regas, from long experience in the peace movement, feared what would come by the United States, and his worst fears were met. And so we formed ICUJP under the motto that religious communities must stop blessing war and violence. And we've been at that ever since, presenting over 1,000 webinars. I should update that number probably. Every Friday, often in person originally, and now on Zoom. So we're very pleased that you're with us. ICUJP depends on the kindness of friends and strangers. In the announcement that brought you here, there was a link to donate to ICUJP. We have a strong but mighty part-time staff. We have ongoing expenses to keep this operation going. So anything you can contribute will be gratefully accepted. Small and large donations, something that maybe for you is significant among the groups that you support, to sustain us, to keep doing this kind of work, presenting the kinds of speakers we're presenting today and have done for all those 24 years. McGregor, tell us about your event.
On Tuesday night, in the middle of the night, Vandenberg Air Force Base tested an intercontinental ballistic missile, firing it, arching over the Pacific, tracked by a tracking station in the beautiful island of Kauai, and landing in the Ronald Reagan test site in the Marshall Islands in Kwajalein. This is done 4 times a year with very little publicity. Everyone who knows about it is against it. Ordinary people, because these carry hydrogen bombs. This is a weapon the military didn't even want. If you go to this, you will see the pure war profiteering in it. If you want to know details about it, I sent an article to Steve and Rick, and they can send it to you because I don't want to take up your time. The people that are interested will learn about it as time goes by. There's always another chance. They do it 4 times a year, every year since the 1970s. And it's right a 3-hour drive from you in the middle of the night. It's amazing. It's the only place that you can actually see American nuclear weapons in action. It doesn't have a bomb on it, it has a dummy, but it's the missile dug up from a silo in the Midwest and brought out here to see that it is, get these words, safe and secure. So thank you for taking the time, but trust me, you'll be hearing about it because there's one every 3 or 4 months. So thank you for the time. And I sent the article. If you're interested, Steve or Rick will send it to you.
Excellent. McGregor, thank you so much. You are such an example of the growth of ICUJP and the expanded work we do. You joined us last year. You've been a dedicated participant. You've alerted us to these events, which we can join in. So please know how important your work is. It goes well acknowledged, and we appreciate you so much. but we will turn immediately to our, I paused in saying guest speaker because Anthony Manousos is hardly a guest. He is a backbone of ICUJP for decades, uh, and he will tell you more about this, but he's co-founder of Making Housing and Community Happen, and is doing tireless work on that issue and many others, born from his activism and his Quaker beliefs. We're proud when we have a speaker drawn from the ICUJP family, because as illustrious and qualified and important speakers we have, who are invited to join us, we have tremendous resources within the ICUJP circle, and it's what has kept us strong. It keeps us links directly to the community, so that as much as possible we stay connected, and are not as remote as these Zoom meetings have to be. We know that in all the hours of the week, other than these 2 hours, folks are doing the hard work, and Anthony Manousos is such an example of that. So we're looking forward to your talk today, Anthony.
Thank you, Stephen. I want to thank you for inviting me to speak. This is Black History Month, and it seems appropriate since I'll be sharing with you the history of Pasadena and Altadena from a racial justice perspective, and how understanding this history can help to ensure us that people of color can return to Altadena and restore their community after the devastating Eaton Canyon wildfires. So first, Altadena. It's a lovely town of around 42,000 people nestled in the foothills of the San Gabriel Mountains in an unincorporated part of LA County. It has a town council but is governed by the LA Board of Supervisors. Pasadena is a city of around 133,000 people located just south of Altadena. Altadenans like to think of themselves as independent of Pasadena, but both communities are deeply interconnected. Many residents of Altadena shop, work, and attend church in Pasadena, and vice versa. When disaster struck Altadena, Pasadenans reached out and provided help and shelter to those displaced. So it makes sense to explore the history of both municipalities in tandem to understand how to move forward after the disastrous wildfire. I'd like to begin by discussing Northwest Pasadena, the historically African American part of our city. This is where my wife Jill and I live. Jill moved into Northwest Pasadena in the 1990s as a kind of urban missionary. She lived at the Harambe Center, which was founded by the African American leader John Perkins, who became her mentor. And John Perkins founded an organization called the Christian Community Association. It's a sort of national network of socially justice-minded evangelical Christians. Over the years, Jill became an ally of the Black community and has worked closely with Black churches. By the time that Jill moved into Northwest Pasadena in the 1990s, it was in decline. Gang violence was on the rise. The population was 80% Black, but the neighborhood was changing. Many middle-class Blacks were moving out, and drugs and gangs had become a serious problem. Nonetheless, because properties were cheap compared to the rest of Pasadena, Latinos and whites were moving in. Until the Fair Housing Act was passed in 1968, Northwest Pasadena was the only place where Blacks could purchase homes in Pasadena, which was an incredibly racist city. One Northwest Pasadena resident told us in the 1950s, you couldn't eat in the restaurants. I mean, not even little hash joints didn't want to serve Blacks. Another resident remembered segregated seating in movie theaters. The Pasadena Theater at DeLacy in Colorado, the Fair Oaks Theater, you could go, but they segregated where your seating was. Others recalled separate doors for Blacks at businesses and being prevented from trying on clothes in stores. This was made illegal by the Civil Rights Act of 1964, but aspects of discrimination continued. Jackie Robinson was raised in Pasadena, and today he's honored with a statue next to City Hall and a park named after him. But once he left the city, he refused to go back because of its racism. Northwest Pasadena was redlined and was the only place blacks could live without fear of being barred from businesses or owning a home. For this reason, since the 1930s, North Fair Oaks, the Black Main Street of Pasadena, has been the heart of the African American community that at one time comprised 20% of the population of Pasadena. Today, only 8% are Black. Older African Americans smile as they recall the thriving Black business districts on North Fair Oaks from Colorado Boulevard to the border of Altadena. They created for themselves a tight-knit community where everyone knew their neighbor and where you'd walk into Bill's Chicken and the waiter would know what you'd order. If your kids got out of line, other parents knew they could help. Fair Oaks was the place to be, where businesses, employment, and a sense of camaraderie form bonds and fond memories to this day. In the 1930s and 40s, Northwest Pasadena was a thriving Black community with beautiful homes and flourishing businesses despite racial segregation. A UCLA study notes that before World War II, Northwest Pasadena was seen as a place of possibility for Black residents. Amid an otherwise hostile suburban Los Angeles, these parts of Pasadena were some of the few neighborhoods of color outside of the Los Angeles core. Northwest Pasadena was a thriving Black neighborhood and commercial district. It boasted some of the city's highest concentration of classic Victorian and craftsman-style architecture, which were within walking distance of local stores, the downtown business district, and the city's civic center, according to one resident. By 1960, Northwest Pasadena was significantly more diverse than Los Angeles. 80% of residents were people of color, compared to just 19% residents of color in the county and 20% in the city of Pasadena overall. And so each year, the Black History Parade marches down North Fair Oaks Avenue. By the way, this year it did not march down North Fair Oaks Avenue because of the fires in Altadena. So we had a festival down at Jackie Robinson Park instead. And so anyway, the Black History Parade celebrates the past and current achievements of Pasadena's African American community. This includes such notables as Mac Robinson, the Olympic athlete, Jackie Robinson, the famous baseball player, Octavia Butler, science fiction writer, Loretta Thompson Glickman, who was the first Black mayor of Pasadena, Dr. Edna Griffin, Pasadena's first African-American woman physician and a civil rights activist. She helped to desegregate the swimming pool in Pasadena, which was whites only, and then one day a week blacks were allowed to swim in it, and then they drained the pool so it could be used for whites again. And Edna Griffin was one of those who was responsible for stopping that from happening. So much of this Black legacy of this street has been destroyed because of urban renewal, freeway construction, and other factors that I'm going to discuss. Remnants of the glory days of North Fair Oaks can be seen mainly between Washington and Woodbury, which is the beginning of Altadena. There are 10 Black churches, a Victorian home called the Decker House, which is now affordable home ownership, the Boys and Girls Club, Barry and Sweeney Pharmacy, and the Woods Valentine Mortuary. My wife Jill and I have worked with this community to revitalize this one thriving business district with a vision to beautify but not gentrify, the motto of the North Fair Oaks Empowerment Initiative. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the decline of Northwest Pasadena. What was once a vibrant community, years of displacement and divestment dramatically changed due to local decisions to implement harmful federal policies and national trends that devastated places like Northwest Pasadena, displacing thousands of residents. So what were the causes of the decline of this area? First, in the 1930s, redlining. In 1949, the Housing Act. 1962, urban renewal and the Pepper Project. And then 1968, the unintended consequences of the Civil Rights Act. In the 1970s, the construction of the 710 and 210 freeways. And from the 1980s to the present, crack cocaine, predatory banking, soaring housing costs, and gentrification. So, urban renewal, by many dubbed Negro removal, forced many Black residents to pack up and sell their homes. But not only Black, but also Japanese and Latino businesses and families were displaced. And some businesses and churches also had to be relocated, like Scott United Methodist Church. And for too many, residents were forced to leave Pasadena for good. Today, many urban planners are recognizing their profession's contribution to systemic racism, segregation, and inequity, making pledges to right historic wrongs. Many decent homes in the North Fair Oaks area were declared blighted so that federal funding could be accessed. These funds were used along with eminent domain to replace perfectly good Black-owned homes with public housing and businesses that would bring in a stronger tax base. For example, the Parsons Corporation was able to build its office on what was once a Black-owned business district. In the southwest corner of Washington and North Fair Oaks, Deacon Westmoreland recalls a co-op village consisting of Black homeowners who were supporting Black businesses. But this changed in the 1960s when the Pasadena City Council decided to tear down the co-op village and replace it with housing for low-income residents. Brian Berry describes how neighbors fought in vain to stop this project. The first urban renewal effort in Pasadena was originally called the Pepper Street Redevelopment Project and is now known as Kings Villages. In order to build support for the project, the city of Pasadena designated the area as being blighted. It wasn't. Alma Stokes, one of the Black professionals who was hired to assist families with their relocation efforts, remembers the neighborhood as a thriving community. It was filled with homeowners, local businesses, shops, a pharmacy, a library, a park, and numerous other neighborhood resources. The area really wasn't blighted, remembers Mrs. Stokes. It wasn't. It was just Black removal. From the date the Pepper Street project was proposed in 1958, there was considerable resistance to the idea on the part of residents. As a result, community members led by Emmett Mickle of the First AME Church of Pasadena organized and fought the Pepper Project for 10 years. Their efforts were ultimately blocked by the city, and the housing project was constructed in 1968. Part of the original intent of the Pasadena Redevelopment Project was to reduce the number of Black families in that part of Pasadena. Interesting, however, there were no white buyers for the $18,500 townhomes. The units sat empty for months, which caused the PRA and the city to subsequently reclassify them as low-income housing. As with similar urban renewal projects across the country, the Pepper Street project did not fulfill the promise of urban redevelopment, which was to improve the quality of housing, rebuild infrastructure, and rid cities of urban decay. The resulting impacts were instead to close local businesses along Fair Oaks Avenue, displace residents, and turn homeowners into renters, which ultimately contributed to a significant decrease in family wealth in communities of color. In addition, it destroyed the connective tissue of the neighborhood. Homes with front porches and lawns where families could connect with kids and kids could play. And in this particular case, it transformed a healthy neighborhood into one ridden with crime. By the time ground was broken for the project in 1968, 299 families had been displaced, 91% of them people of color. After a year of serving as relocation specialist for the PRV, Alma Stokes resigned from her job and returned to teaching at Washington School. It was an extremely taxing and frustrating task to find housing for families who had lost their homes. I left that job because I couldn't stand working there anymore watching Black removal, said Mrs. Stokes of her experience recently. Kings Village consists of 314 units. These were poorly maintained by the city and became known for gangs and crime. Even the police were reluctant to go into the project. Kings Village was renovated by Pastor Gene Birch, who made sure that no residents were displaced during renovation, and she managed the project well. It was recently sold to the Rose Affordable Housing Preservation Fund. But many Black residents still grieve the loss of this prior neighborhood, wanting to see more Black homeownership in Pasadena, since that helps to create generational wealth and stability. So that was one initiative that really hurt the Black community. The second was the construction of the 210 and 710 freeways. The 1956 Highway Act, which released federal funding for highways across the U.S., has sliced through African American neighborhoods and thriving Black business districts across the United States. And that was also true of Northwest Pasadena with the 210 freeway. The construction of the 210 freeway and the 710 stub had devastating effects on Pasadena's African American, Latino, and Japanese community. In the 1950s and 60s, planners and other local officials built upon decades of disinvestment, redlining, and urban renewal projects to push a new route of the Foothill Freeway Interstate 210 through the northwest neighborhoods of Pasadena, resulting in the displacement of nearly 3,000 predominantly Black residents. An alternate route running largely through uninhabited parkland along the eastern edge of the Arroyo Seco Valley by the Rose Bowl Stadium parking lot was rejected. Thousands of homes and businesses were demolished to clear the path of the Foothill Freeway. Property owners were reimbursed according to fair market value. However, property values were considerably depressed due to historical redlining, and displaced residents of color struggled to find housing in the rest of Pasadena due to continued segregation. Already lower home values adjacent to the freeway grew less than home values across the city for years. Over the next 2 decades after construction, the number of housing units dropped not just from demolition for the freeway, but also in adjacent areas due to negative secondary effects. White communities like South Pasadena rigorously and successfully opposed the 710 extension. But the Black residents of Pasadena lacked their political clout, and thousands lost their homes. In 1964, the California Highway Commission determined the routing of the first 5 miles of the what was called a 710 freeway through the communities of El Sereno, South Pasadena, Pasadena, to complete the adoption of the Long Beach Freeway. While the freeway never materialized at El Sereno or South Pasadena, the 710 freeway Northern Exchange was constructed in the city of Pasadena in the early 1970s, resulting in what was called the Northern Stub. The construction of this stub displaced thousands of residents, again, people of color, and divided a residential community from an active central business district. Now, this Northern Stub has been relinquished to Pasadena by Caltrans. And this is a big deal. This is 57 acres of prime real estate, and it's worth hundreds of millions of dollars. And the residents are calling for reparations to compensate those who lost their homes. Efforts are underway to rectify the injustice caused by freeway construction, with residents calling for reparations, including the right of return and just compensation to the African American community. So we have a commission that is looking at this, and we're really hoping that there can be significant reparations made. So the next thing that I'll talk about are the banks, the Civil Rights Act, crack cocaine, and predatory banking. So in 1949, the 1949 Housing Act provided funding only for new construction, but not for multifamily or rehabbing older units. It also did nothing to prevent redlining. The red pin drawn around Northwest Pasadena deprived families of the opportunity to obtain bank loans to improve ailing housing stock. This act also did nothing to prevent segregated neighborhoods. Racially restricted covenants were still allowed. To compound matters, FHA loans would not provide mortgage insurance to blacks. Therefore, banks would not provide these loans. There was financing under the 1949 Housing Act that enabled people with 10% down to purchase homes, but only for new construction, not to improve older housing stock. And mortgage insurance was not offered to people of color, again, barring blacks from loans. The 1956 Federal Highway Act gave federally funded access to people of means to leave urban cores and build new homes in the suburbs if the family was white, had transport, and the required 10% down for the FHA loan. Therefore, white suburbs like La Cañada sprang up across the U.S. By the way, Jill is working on a Housing Justice Institute in La Cañada, which has almost no affordable housing and is like 99% white to this day. And they're fighting affordable housing tooth and nail in La Cañada. There's so many roadblocks to home ownership, blacks began their own bank. This is significant. They started their own bank in 1968. A black trash collector who'd done very well by feeding edible trash to the pigs on his farm in Monrovia started Family Thrift so loans could be offered to blacks. This later became One United with a branch in the southwest corner of Lake and Washington Avenue in Pasadena. This has since consolidated with their LA branch on Crenshaw in Los Angeles and banks in Boston. One bank has expanded and today is the largest black-owned bank in the U.S. Thanks to Martin Luther King, the Fair Housing Act was passed in 1968, which allowed blacks to live outside of Northwest Pasadena. Many of those with means moved to other parts of the city or to places like Altadena. Such good national policy had some unintended consequences. The ability to move undermined the mixed income community needed to keep the strong fabric of society needed to flourish. As Northwest Pasadena began to unravel, the community was left with ailing housing stock and a lack of access to good jobs. Some turned to drugs to make ends meet. During the 1980s, in the Reagan years, many turned to crack cocaine. This led to the proliferation of gangs, causing even more residents to want to leave and escape the violence. The community really began to change in the late 70s and early 80s, recalls Pastor Stewart. There were an influx of drugs and crack cocaine. A lot of children of homeowners sold their homes. It became a cycle, and you saw displacement. Then the rent started rising, and people left. If there was someone with a vision and desire to see it what it once was, it would be a thriving neighborhood. This opened the way for gentrification in the Northwest, where homes were affordable. Once whites started buying up some of this older housing stock and fixed up their homes, others followed. Housing prices started to rise, making homes unaffordable to most people of color. When Jill realized that she was part of the gentrification process by moving into this neighborhood, she became concerned about how to address this problem through affordable housing, which helps counter the effects of gentrification. The 2008 mortgage meltdown made matters worse. It had its epicenter in Pasadena with the One West Bank, where it is estimated that 68% of the bank's foreclosures occurred in minority communities. The racial wealth gap was already sizable prior to the Great Depression and increased during and after. During the recession, Black and Latino homeowners lost 48 and 44% of their wealth, respectively, while white homeowners lost 26%. With African Americans losing even more of their homes to foreclosure, it left more homes available for gentrification to take hold. As home prices began to soar and some blacks cashed out, moving east to Fontana or inland to Lancaster and Victorville or north to Altadena, others ended up on the street. Today, 31% of Pasadena's homeless population is African American, even though they make up only 8% of the population. This extreme displacement, disinvestment, and long history of exclusion has caused generational trauma and the loss of over 50% of the Black population of Pasadena since 1990. Black churches have become commuter churches. one African American church has only 8 members left. Tax increment financing and upzoning led to the redevelopment of Old Pasadena, leaving behind the once thriving business district in North Fair Oaks. Rather than upzone North Fair Oaks at densities attractive to businesses and developers, the city council cut zoning capacity in half for fear of more nursing homes moving in. Nursing homes had moved in when businesses could no longer sustain themselves. The city could simply have changed the zoning to disallow more nursing homes, but instead imposed low density that has kept this area undeveloped from being redeveloped. Thankfully, no more nursing homes are allowed in the area, but Pasadena is still recommending the same density in its newly proposed North Fair Oaks specific plan. This means that there will essentially be no significant change for the next 20 years. Our nonprofit, Making Housing and Community Happen, has been at work since 2015 to revive this once thriving community and ensure a bright future. So I'm going to pause for a minute. That's a lot to take in. But I think you can see this is all to sort of set the context for what's about to happen in Altadena. You can see how policies over the years, one policy after another, has made economic development really difficult for the Black community. So do you have any questions before I go on to the more hopeful story that I'm going to tell next?
Anthony, so much of this seems so well documented and blatant. Were there any, to your knowledge, any legal challenges to each of these efforts? Because many of them are driven by statutes and laws affected by the government.
Well, unfortunately, Steve, the statutes and laws are what made it possible. It was the Housing Act of 1949 and the Highway Act, and all of these things were, everything was done under cover of law, to use Rothstein's term. So it was hard for them to fight against what were the powers that be that had law on their side.
And you know of no NAACP lawsuit?
Oh, they were fighting it. Oh, definitely.
Right.
Yeah. There was a lot of pushback, a lot of attempts to fight City Hall, but most of this time they just didn't have the political clout that places like South Pasadena had. So I'm going to share what our organization has done to try to revitalize North Fair Oaks, and then I'm going to move into Altadena and talk about some of the suggestions and proposals that have come up that would help ensure that the people of color can return. So, to seek to address the deep wounds and history of injustices on North Fair Oaks Avenue, Making Housing and Community Happen has stepped in. In 2015, the Interdenominational Ministerial Alliance, the oldest association of Black pastors in the greater Pasadena area, voted to allow my wife Jill to plan the resource employment fair that year with and by the community, an empowerment model. The goal of that year's resource fair was, as in the past, to provide resources, but also much more. To find the leaders to plan the fair, those treasures in the community, she formed a team to craft a survey as part of a listening campaign. To help prevent further displacement and reweave a once thriving community, Jill began this campaign in 2015, resulting in a survey of 150 people within a 5-block area on North Fair Oaks Avenue. Simple questions were asked, like, how long have you been in the area? What are your dreams and concerns for the community? Do you want to help bring about change? Most of the 10 churches in this 5-block stretch hosted orientations and participated in conducting surveys in their community, inviting businesses and residents to have one-on-one discussions to answer these questions. And the results were telling. An event took place at Bethel Church in July of 2015 to unveil the results of the survey. The pastors were mostly concerned about employment and good jobs. Others were concerned with economic development, wanting coffee and ice cream shops and thriving businesses. But the overwhelming result of the survey related to the street itself, not feeling safe due to traffic, cars speeding by, the lack of lighting, the need for more shade, less street noise, and good sidewalks. Some felt it was a waste of time to imagine improved community because they felt the city would never listen or agree to make any changes. We realized we needed to resurrect hope. To resurrect hope, we needed folks to see the many assets in the community still had and that there were people who cared. The planning team, which consists of 20 plus people, decided to close Tremont Street and set up booths and represent all the businesses, churches, resources, and employment opportunities, and to highlight the skills, assets, and gifts within the community. To foster good jobs, the Workforce Employment Board brought a full-sized mobile unit where people were given help to write resumes and apply for jobs on the spot. Upon leaving the unit, local barbers provided free haircuts. Job applicants also received free dress shirts thanks to Councilmember Tyrone Hampton. Pastors welcomed folks and gave a word about their dreams for the community from the stage. Elected officials such as Judy Chu, our congressional representative, former mayor and Terry Tornick showed up and spoke. The community felt important. This neglected community felt important and seen. Because of the Job Fest, people of the street knew that the empowerment team, Hope for Change, began to emerge. Because of overwhelming response from the surveys were all related to the street, the team decided to learn from experts about how to address the concerns they had. So the North Fair Oaks Empowerment Team partnered with the Complete Streets Coalition. They planned an event at the Boys and Girls Club where teams formed to walk into various parts of the street to observe and visually imagine what they felt and what they would like to feel and see. The coalition boiled the list down to observations, ideas, into a list of specific items that the empowerment team began to address by meeting with the Department of Transportation, the Transportation Advisory Commission, the Northwest Position, and the City Council. Today, several of these requests have been completed, including more trees and sidewalk repairs and strengthening the crosswalks at Montana. In 2017, the Pasadena City Council unanimously voted to put up a $268,000 traffic light to help slow traffic and bring safety by New Hope Church in Paso Alto, since they had disabled residents and programming on both sides of the street. Seeing this signal in place resurrected more hope for change. Some items are approved but are still waiting for funding, such as Complete Streets. Some are not yet approved by the city. Since then, the North Fair Oaks Empowerment Team has continued its work of listening and supporting the community. We've also called attention to the need for restorative justice. And one of the things we did in 2018 was to have a prayer vigil at New Hope Baptist Church, and 60 people showed up. Many religious and community leaders took part, including State Senator Portantino, Pasadena City Councilman John Kennedy, and others. And they all read from scripture, prayed, shared personal stories. And Jill composed a powerful liturgy of confession of past and present racial injustices and a commitment to righting them. It was inspiring to see Black and white folks coming together to support congregations that want to have affordable housing built on their property but could not do so because of restrictive zoning laws. Our organization, MHCH, conducted a campaign to allow the proper zoning for congregations to provide affordable housing. And we worked on this for 3 years. Finally, in 2022, Pasadena voted to allow affordable housing on church land, but only in land that was zoned as commercial, which was very few churches in the whole city. We were disappointed that the city didn't allow affordable housing on all church properties throughout the city. So we helped start a statewide campaign that lasted 3 years and engaged over 300 organizations. Finally, in 2023, the state passed SB 4, which rezones all congregational land statewide for affordable housing by right. This was a huge win. So then we did a second survey in 2015 with similar results. We sent it out to 1,000 households, and I'm going to move on a little bit. What basically the same concerns for slowing traffic, affordable housing. I should say that this area of the city is the most dangerous street in the whole city, North Fair Oaks. They had 68 accidents in a 6-month period. And there have been, I think, 4 deaths at least on the corner of North Fair Oaks and Washington. So it's a very dangerous area. And it also has the public library on Pittoresca and the Boys and Girls Club and a lot of nursing homes with elderly, frail people. So there's a desperate need to address the traffic safety problem. So then the other important development was the vision plan for this area. We were very blessed that a urban planner named Phil Burns of the Arroyo Group offered to create a vision plan. This is a technical term for urban planners. It's a very complicated process. You have to go to the community, get their input, and then you create a plan for how the community could be redeveloped with zoning changes and other things. And it typically would cost $20,000 to $30,000 to create a plan like this. He spent over a year, almost 2 years actually, working with us and donated his time and his firm's time for this. And it was quite impressive. And we're now calling on the city council to adopt this vision plan instead of the recommendations of the planning department, which would basically perpetuate the status quo. We feel that our vision plan would at least enable development of this area to happen over the next 20 years. So the 4 elements that are most important is prioritizing safety with a complete streets redesign, zoning changes that would allow for affordable and inclusionary housing, then recognizing the historical significance of North Fair Oaks. That northern part of the city that leads into Altadena could be rebranded or branded as a Black Main Street. And it would hopefully, with the right incentives, draw businesses. And we want locally owned businesses, not to have Starbucks come in. And to encourage locally owned business, where we recommend establishing a forgivable, interest-free small business investor fund. So these are some of the elements of the vision plan. We have gathered about 150 signatures and letters of support from numerous organizations in the city, including the Boys and Girls Club, Pasadena Heritage, the Northwest Commission, and our city council member, Tyrone Hampton, also has expressed strong support. So we've made this our top priority, and we're hoping that this will be accepted by the city, and we have a lot of work to do to make that happen, but we're on the way. So I'm going to pause there because now I want to talk about Altadena. Does anybody have any questions about where we're at so far?
Anthony, on that one, does the kind of rebuilding that the fires will call for, does that help you promote the vision plan, or will it distract resources away from the vision plan?
That's a really good question. I think the timing of it, there's never a good time to have a disaster, but it did have an impact on our efforts because some of the members of our team lost their homes during the fire. And I think it knocked the wind out of our sails with all of the, having to deal with so much grieving. I mean, so many members of our community have lost, have lost homes. The AME church that we work closely with, 54 members of that church lost their homes. 54 members of one church. Those little black churches along North Fair Oaks, 30 of their members lost homes. And our town council member, Tyrone Hampton, 15 members of his family lost homes. So we're talking about, not just the physical destruction of homes, but there's been so much grief and that's hit the community at a time when we were just hoping to push this through the planning commission. But so it's been hard. It's been really hard. But we, as you know about Jill, she never gives up, and we're working together to sort of do our best to make sure that this happens. And I'll talk a little bit about the relationship between what we're doing and Altadena next. So the history of Pasadena contains many lessons for what needs to happen to ensure that people of color aren't displaced from Altadena during the reconstruction process. As I've said, both cities are deeply interconnected. Alan Edson, who was president of the NAACP in Pasadena, remembers growing up in Northwest Pasadena in the 1950s. His parents told him not to go into Altadena because it was a sundown city, or sundown town where blacks were not welcome. But in 1962, his family moved there and have lived there ever since. Today, Altadena has one of California's most affluent middle-class black neighborhoods, with 80% being homeowners, twice the national rate. In 1960, Altadena was 95% white, 4% black. Partly because of the 1968 Fair Housing Act, which prohibited racial discrimination in housing, and because the community had relatively inexpensive housing by Southern California standards, African Americans began moving into the town in the 1970s in significant numbers. Many of these black residents moved from Pasadena. Altadena adapted to the changing demographics while maintaining its unique character. As late as 1970, the town was 68% white. By 1980, the percentage of blacks in the population peaked at 43%. Since then, it has declined to 31%, and by 2020, it was 18%. So there has been gentrification, and there's been displacement of the black community over this period, comparable to what happened in Pasadena. The white population in 2020 was 46%. Asian Americans and Latinos, almost all of whom arrived since the 1990s, comprise most of the remainder of the community. So there's a significant Asian community there, and as well as a Latino. Altadena's black residents included a number of middle-class African American professionals, such as doctors, engineers, attorneys, pharmacists, teachers. It also included many working-class people, such as railroad and factory workers, and as first-time homebuyers acquired properties in this area. Altadena's most prominent African-American residents have included actor Sidney Poitier, science fiction writer Octavia Butler, and former Black Panther leader Eldridge Cleaver, author of Soul on Ice. Rodney King also grew up in Altadena. With one of California's most affluent black populations, half of its African-American households earn more than $100,000 a year. Some have called Altadena the Black Beverly Hills. Now, the effects of the fire have been devastating on everyone, but more so on the black community, according to a recent UCLA study. Approximately 8,000 Altadena residents out of 42,000 are black, and its home ownership rate twice the national average. 61% of black households in Altadena were located within the fire perimeter, compared to 50% of non-black, another 10% more. Nearly half of the homes of black households were destroyed or damaged, compared to 37% by non-black households. Many of these homes were in the family for generations. Their mortgages were paid off, and some did not have insurance. Among Black homeowners in Altadena, 45% are cost burdened, spending over 30% of their household income on housing costs. And 28% are severely cost burdened, spending more than 50% of their household income on housing. In comparison, only 32% of non-Black homeowners are cost burdened, and only 13% are severely cost burdened. So for this reason, some Black homeowners could not afford insurance. Predatory developers are seeking to buy up homes on the cheap, despite Governor Newsom's executive order in January 2025 that temporarily banned unsolicited offers to buy homes in areas impacted by the fires. Not long ago, about a week or two ago, Jill was called up by a developer who wanted to buy our home for cash. And she responded, "Don't you know that what you're doing is illegal?" And he hung up. The governor's order was intended to protect fire victims, from predatory real estate speculators like this. Homeowners need time to consider options other than selling their homes. An Altadena activist made it clear: Altadena is not for sale. Catherine Barger has said she wants to protect Blacks from being priced out of Altadena. She believes that the biggest threat is from developers building luxury condos, but that actually doesn't make a lot of sense. Condos are generally less expensive than single-family homes, especially in places like Pasadena. She's also opposed to increased density, in other words, multifamily housing, even though 38 multifamily apartment buildings burned down, and 20% of Altadenans are renters. If these apartments aren't rebuilt, how will tenants move back? And if they are rebuilt, the rents are likely to be much higher. If affordable housing isn't encouraged, how will tenants afford to move back? Nonetheless, she and the Board of Supervisors recommended policies that would discourage affordable housing and make it harder for low-income people of color to return to Altadena. That's why we're urging the governor to reject the recommendations that the LA County Board of Supervisors made on January 23rd, despite much public protest, which will deprive Altadenans of their right to SB 9 and other bills that foster affordability. The Board of Supervisors voted to suspend for 5 years. By the way, their vote is non-binding. This was a recommendation that they made to the governor, and the governor has to decide whether to accept or reject it. So they recommended suspending for 5 years many excellent hard-won state housing policies, especially needed now with the opportunity to build back better, to both retain the Altadena population and keep the character of Altadena. By the way, a lot of times when you hear someone say, "We want to keep the character of our city," it's often focusing on, it's not taking into account people of color. We want to keep this character of our city. But how is this going to impact people of color? We're especially concerned about SB 9. This was a bill that hasn't really had the effects that people expected. It allows homeowners to split a lot and to sell their lot, and then they can have up to 4 units, a home plus an ADU on these 2 lots. And this would be really ideal for some Altadenans who are, land rich but cash poor, because if they can't have enough money to build back their home, the only option would be to sell it. But this gives them a chance to sell half of their lot and use that money to rebuild their home. By the way, the law also requires homeowners to live for at least 3 years on the property after the lot split. So this would deter developers from taking advantage. So this is a good bill. It's an option that some Altadenans might like to have, but the LA County Board of Supervisors is recommending that this not be allowed. They're also so we don't think it's the intention of the Board of Supervisors to hurt the Black community. They just haven't thought this through. And I think it's not going to pass. I've just been hearing some reports that Scott Wiener is not going to let this come for a vote. But, we just have to be vigilant and make sure that, as in the past, policies were passed that negatively impacted the Black community. We have to make sure that doesn't happen now. But we also have to look at things that are going to positively impact this community. And you know what? I want to give Grace a chance to speak before she leaves. You have to leave at 9. So I'm going to talk about some positive things, but I want to give Grace, 5 minutes. Is that enough to talk about CLTs? Because that's an option that could help to ensure affordability. And if you could explain that a little bit, Grace, I'd appreciate it.
Thank you, Anthony. Oh, wow. You did a superb job in laying the framework for the situation that is in Altadena right now. And it is a very confusing time because people are getting multiple different ideas of what needs to happen in Altadena. Many are people from the outside who say you should do this, you should do that, come here. There is a big push to get Governor Newsom to expand that blockage of developers coming in beyond March 31 for at least a year. We would prefer 5 years. All of these issues about housing are incredibly complicated. It is hard for people who are in the midst of grief to also try to figure out what they should do about their house. And in some cases, these are elderly people. And I'm thinking about myself. I just don't know if I could have handled a fire and being able to reconstruct and think of rebuilding and all the hassle. So I would be prey to somebody coming and just offering me cash on the barrelhead for my land, and I'll try to find somewhere else. So to avoid part of this, the Making Housing and Community Happen have spun off a group that we are now the San Gabriel Valley Community Land Trust. And what has been happening in the talks within Altadena is actually, it appears that there may be 2 CLTs forming. Now, what a community land trust does is it's a nonprofit organization that can buy up the land. You can sell your house to the CLT or put it as a donation to the CLT, as the case may be. But in most of these cases that we're talking about, it would be sell your land. Then the community itself, with its board of directors, would say, we are never going to allow this to be used by people above a certain average medium income, which in the case of Altadena will be lower than in most cases in the San Gabriel Valley. And they can then have that money. If we as a land trust would buy that lot, then they could have that money to rebuild. Because like Anthony said, many of these people, and it isn't just Black, there's a lot of Hispanics actually in Altadena who lost multiple houses and multiple households living within a house, have been displaced by it, but they could then rebuild their own house and it's theirs for a long-term lease. And it will, if they want to sell it, then they can do it, but it will be under the requirements that the community land trust sets of saying, well, it's only going to be within the affordable housing range, so that you don't have this kind of displacement happening. That's what community land trusts do. They preserve the area. And in many cases, it is individual buildings, or in this case, it's going to be a community. So right now we're in conversation with 2 different groups one is a mixed group that is interested in community land trusts and have already coined and saved the name Altadena Community Land Trust. And within the African American community, there's another group that may have their own Black community land trust. These are all in the conversation stages because it takes so much time to work out details. We're moving much further ahead with the Altadena Community Land Trust. And the problem there is that, I mean, the reason the San Gabriel Valley Community Land Trust was set up as a broad whole regional land trust so that different land trusts could incubate within it. And that way they don't have to go through the process of forming a 501c3 and getting all the paperwork done in order to be able to engage in the complicated financing and rebuilding of this. So that's kind of where we are with the community land trust. And it won't serve a lot of people. It won't serve a lot of white people because they could do a lot. They have insurance. They can easily rebuild. I mean, the people who bought our house, I was shocked to find out that their insurance is paying for a condo in Santa Monica for them for 3 years, you know, while they go through the rebuild process. There's not a single one of the people we're talking with that could have that opportunity. But so we see the discrepancy in terms of income generation that allows, you know, and it's easy to just take over. You say, well, let me just buy up your land because this other way is a little bit more complicated and takes more time. But also remember that there is an east and west divide in Altadena, and Lake Avenue kind of runs that divide. And this is one reason why we believe a lot of the houses burned in West Pasadena, because they did not get evacuation orders in time to leave. And this is why there were so many deaths all in West Altadena. East Altadena was getting warnings since 7 p.m. the night before. And, you know, I was staying in Altadena at my friend's house, and we did not get an evacuation order until 3:25 in the morning. By then, many houses were already on fire in West Altadena. We were able to get out and her house was saved, but that didn't happen for a lot of people who just did not have time. So that east-west divide also skews the statistics that Anthony was talking about. Because really, if you look at the statistics within West Side, it's even more dire than the East Side, which are higher income homes. And in fact, when we bought our home on the West Side, people told us, don't buy on the West Side because your property won't go up in value. Make sure you look on the East Side. This was 32 years ago. And we said, no, this is like kind of the commitment of where we want to be in this kind of neighborhood. But we even had Black friends who only bought on the East Side because they knew that their value of the land would go up more. So that divide makes the work that making housing and community happen much more important, because this has been a completely disenfranchised group of community that, in spite of the disenfranchisement, has been thriving. And that is the thing that has broken our heart the most, has been we've lost the community. We've lost the owners of all these businesses that we would go to, that when we go back, we still take those same walks and end up at Fox's Restaurant or somewhere. Those are all gone. You know, the community is dispersed, and maybe they'll rebuild and maybe they won't. But that disbursement of community can be really a deeper psychological impact than actually losing your house. And so this is why it's very important to try to find ways that the community takes ownership, and they are the ones to decide how they will do their own rebuilding, but provide opportunities for them to do that and financing for them to do that, so that they can feel empowered to stay, to split the lot. I mean, that's hugely important what Anthony was talking, because by splitting your lots, you're able to then build a small ADU and live in it while you build the other one. And so there's multiple reasons why one should do this. So I'll just leave it at that, but turn it back to Anthony.
Anthony, if I
Yeah.
may, if we're losing Grace at 9 to ask a brief question, Grace, thank you so much. Thank you for exactly the kind of work that you have prepared yourself for so many years. Where does the San Gabriel CLT get its funds in order to buy these properties?
So the San Gabriel Valley Community Land Trust right now has probably 10,000 in its bank, $10,000 in its bank account. We are just beginning, and we have been in process for 5 years. It takes that long to really, in fact, many of the land trusts around California have been telling us, oh no, we didn't get our first project till we were 10 years, you know. It takes a lot of work. But yes, so the financing will actually come from their CDFIs, which are community development financial institutions, who look at this kind of thing as a way of helping communities. And so a lot of foundations will give money to precisely this because they need to be able to give to a nonprofit organization rather than to individuals. And so we're hoping to gain from that. But we are also hoping that the county will pony up because after Houston, the flooding in Houston, and after the fires in Lahaina, both of those places, in fact, the Houston Community Land Trust was born out of that disaster. And they got $52 million from the city to get this community land trust going. So we're trying to provide these examples to our county officials, and the county has given 14 million to a group of CLTs that started. They're just fledgling, but before us, and they have started to get some projects going. So it isn't like this is outside of their thinking. Hilda Solis has been very, very heavily involved in community land trusts in LA. So, but all of those are really LA City. There's nothing providing for the unincorporated areas such as like Altadena. So this is where Catherine Barger has to step in, and we're trying to put pressure on her to do what Hilda Solis has been doing. And so that's where we would get our money from.
Yeah.
And there's actually right now some artists who are coming to us and say they're putting on concerts and they want to make the Altadena Community Land Trust their figurehead to raise money, and could they go through us? Because the Altadena Community Land Trust cannot accept any money. So this is how we would get the funding for that type of thing. It's very complicated.
Yeah. I want to add that I went to the meeting of Civitas, which is a community group that was started by a city council member that meets monthly, and it was a great meeting last night. They had community leaders from Altadena, and I heard that Catherine Barger is having some meetings to discuss funding a community land trust in Altadena. So that's on the table.
And the other thing she is doing, which is a good thing, is trying to start a land bank. And that's different from a land trust.
Yeah.
Because community land trust is all the community decides decides what's going to happen. The land trust would be that the county, the land trust would buy the land and just hold it until someone can come and buy it, until someone has the funding for buying it and keeping it below market rate so that it doesn't go crazy and it cannot be used in the speculative market. So she is trying to set up a land trust. And there's a Green Line Foundation with the founder and president is Jasmine Schuper, and her organization is also able to buy land and also is collaborating with us on the Community Land Trust. So there's different ways that people are stepping in.
Yeah, I was going to mention Green Line Foundation. I think it's a great organization. We very strongly support Jasmine and her work. I do have some concern with the new administration and its opposition to anything like DEI, that they might try to declare what they're doing discriminatory, because the Green Line Housing Foundation specifically raises money for low-income people of color. So it is race-based. I hope that they're not going to get sued by the government for that. But for now, they've started something called Restore, Rebuild, and Remain, a fund to help homeowners of color in Altadena to rebuild. So that's one of the things we're supporting. Also, Habitat for Humanity is going to be building homes, and I think the Mennonites too. One of the proposals that we're presenting for was developed by Professor Margaret Lee, who helped with the Community Land Trust, and she put together a proposal to resurrect a policy for ADUs that happened a few years ago, where people were given $40,000 to build an ADU or to renovate, to make legal an existing ADU. And they had millions of dollars in that fund. It was very successful. Many ADUs were built as a result, but they ran out of money. So what we're proposing is a fund that would give $50,000 to $100,000 to a lower income homeowner to build an ADU. And that would mean that they could build it on their property prior to building their home, because it would be much cheaper. They could live there while their home was being rebuilt. And then after they've moved into their primary home, the ADU could be rented out, and it would be what's called naturally occurring affordable housing. Generally speaking, ADUs rent below market rates. So it would really solve a lot of problems. And we sent that proposal into Sasha Paris, and unfortunately the deadline is today to have new legislation, but there's something called placeholders, and if she just does a placeholder, this could be something that could come up this year for to benefit homeowners. So we're just looking for different creative ideas. The meeting that took place last night at Civitas was very encouraging for me. Altadenans are fiercely independent. They don't want outsiders coming in to tell them what to do. On the other hand, they're open to hearing ideas, and then they can decide for themselves
Anthony,
what they want to do.
thank you, Grace. I know you have to leave. Please come back and report in to us directly or through Anthony on your progress. Thank you so much.
Anthony will certainly know, about what's happening. So whether I can come or not, at least he will. Thank you so much,
Okay.
everybody.
All right.
Good to see
Thank
you.
you, Grace.
Be safe. Anthony, I know you have some more material prepared. I hope you may address a different community. We've talked a lot about homeowners and renters. What about the homeless? What's going to happen to
That's a really good question, and we don't have an answer yet. This is one of the concerns that we have because, with tens of thousands of people looking for apartments, prices of apartments are going up. And, we're trying to do what we can to stop that process, but it's almost inevitable. One of the things we're working on is an eviction moratorium, because some landlords are kicking out their tenants so they can raise rent. But back to the unhoused population, we don't know yet how this is going to be impacted, but we're following this closely. We work with service providers and different organizations, but it's definitely going to hurt unhoused people because they're going to be competing for apartments and housing with people who means.
Yeah, we were hopeful. We've talked about this briefly at ICUJP that the devastating fires have shown people what it's like to be without a home. Mm-hmm. And the hopeful way to look at this is, could this begin to be an integrated program to restore people who'd lost their homes, but also to provide affordable and sustainable housing for those who were without houses before the fires. So I'm hopeful that kind of thinking goes into this.
Well, I hope so too. You know, one thing that I do know is that at the convention center in Pasadena, it was open to both people displaced by the fire and unhoused people living in the city. And some of the people who were displaced felt uncomfortable being around unhoused people in that setting. So, you know, there's just deep seated prejudice towards people who are unhoused, and it's hard to overcome it. I mean, that's part of the work we do. And the best way we have found to dispel some of the stereotypes is to allow people or give people who have been homeless the opportunity to share their stories. You know, say I lived on the street for 11 years and I was into drugs, or I was struggling with, because I was a woman who was abused by my spouse, and so I ended up on the street. And now I'm housed. I have a job. And my life has been transformed. When people hear those stories, that's what tends to change hearts and minds. Not statistics or facts and stuff like that, but
You bet.
stories.
Anthony, do you have more prepared material, or are you
Not
open?
yet. I'm just open now to for
Okay.
questions and discussion. We're still in the try to figure it all out stage.
Right. No, well, you're doing a lot more than figuring it out, and that's obvious from your presentation. So we have a few minutes for questions and comments. Anthony, I'm convinced that a version of this would be published in LA Progressive, possibly portions of it in the Pasadena News. But I know LA Progressive would be eager to see an edited version of this published, and then you can push it out to everybody.
Okay, that sounds good. Let me.
So-
I'll put my blog entry, and I certainly will take that to heart. I think that you're right.
Good.
It needs to get published.
Offline, we'll talk to
Yeah.
Dick and Sharon.
Okay.
Don, go right ahead.
Yeah, my question is, we're still struggling here in Santa Cruz after our big fires. We had the things that we're still having problems with is permitting process to rebuild, and also our insurance fire. We're just not getting insured anymore because we're considered to be in a high risk fire area. Is that something that you're seeing now, or is that just something that might happen in the future for you because it's too early?
Well, it's certainly something that is in everybody's mind. Even us. We live. We were several blocks south of Woodbury, so the fire came within a mile of our home, and we had a lot of soot and smoke in our area, and we're getting our house remediated, which will cost $34,000. Fortunately, the insurance covers it, but we're concerned, and so is everybody else, that insurance rates will go up really significantly. We can kind of afford it, but it's going to be really, really hard for those low-income homeowners, the ones who are cost burdened and severely cost burdened before the fire. Adding to that increased insurance is going to make it really hard. That's why having an additional source of income like an ADU might help these lower income homeowners to stay in place. So, we're learning from previous experience, the Lahaina fire and the fires in Northern California. People in Altadena are in touch with those, people from those areas to try to learn what lessons they can learn from, so that they can make better decisions. Yeah.
Thank you. Let's see. Is that Rebecca?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Anthony. That was very informative. I don't want to be a Debbie Downer here, but I do want to let you know from my experience going through the Woolsey fire. The LA County Board of Supervisors haven't learned a damn thing. And I don't think we would have seen the damage that we've seen in the Palisades and in Altadena had they taken lessons learned from the Woolsey fire. Sheila Kuehl did a report after having a lot of town halls with us who went through that experience, and it basically concluded that the damages were what they were because the sheriff dropped the ball in communication. They blamed the sheriff, who was Alex Villanueva at the time. And this report never once mentioned climate change. So here we are years later, and even worse, tragedy happened. And Barger, she has been silent while city of Lancaster expels the unhoused from their city boundaries and really takes them to the desert, just dumps them in the desert to die. And these are the people we are dealing with that we're looking to for leadership. And so my focus is going to be on the animals. You hear a lot of heartwarming stories about animals being rescued, but this shouldn't have happened. A lot of animals burned to death, and we're gonna get results. It's gonna be we're gonna have to do some public records, but I'm just speaking up here right now to just urge everyone to shine the light of accountability on our political leaders. Don't let them get away with saying nothing or trying to gloss over, turn lemons into lemonade, and hold them accountable for their words.
Yeah. Yeah, I totally agree with you. I think it's a mixed bag with Catherine Barger. A few years ago, a affordable housing developer came to Altadena wanting to build a 5-story development, and it was for people experiencing homelessness, and it was legal because this is an unincorporated area and it fit with the zoning, but Altadena residents went ballistic and opposed it. And Catherine Barger could easily have pulled the plug on the project. Instead, she worked out a compromise. Instead of 5 stories, it's 4 stories, and there's a sort of they adjusted the setbacks and everything. Happily, it exists. It survived the fire, and it was one of the only affordable housing projects in the entire city. It wouldn't have happened without Catherine Barger. So I just want to say, I disagree with her policies, but I think her heart's in the right place. I think she's sincere when she says she doesn't want to displace people of color. I think she's sincere. She just doesn't know in the heat of it. I think she's so caught up with the idea, let's keep Altadena just the way it was physically, and she's not thinking about the demographics and how the impact of policies might influence that. But we have to I think it really isn't helpful to get into the blame game. I think it's more helpful to say everybody's doing the best they can, and how can we work together to come up with the best possible policies? We have to have hope. We have to not give way to despair, but we also have to be realistic. The past shows us that there's a lot of things that can go wrong, and we need to take that into account as we move forward.
So thank you for what you do every day. Thanks to Jill. I'm so grateful that you emphasized all of Jill's visionary work, and please thank her and give her an extra hug, a collective hug from all of ICUJP for the work that she's doing with you and for your work. Please check in with us. I mean, you're a board member, you're a regular here, and we want to follow this. And finally, we want to support it in formal ways whenever you are looking for interfaith support for the work you do. Please consider.
I forgot to mention, there is one thing it is that you write to the governor about SB 9, and I'll put that in the chat. Even though you're not, I guess if you're not in the city, you could still write to the governor and let him know that you want to see
Yeah.
this, yeah, I'll include
Put
that.
it in the chat, but offline, work with Rick. I think we
Okay.
should push it out.
Right.
Perhaps when we release the recording of this presentation, we'll highlight what people can do specifically. And we've updated your card-carrying membership in ICUJP, so that's already there. Thank you so much, Anthony.
Okay.
Let's turn to Jasmine Haley. She put all or part of her reflection in the chat, but assuming good audio, Jasmine, please present your reflection.
Okay, hi, I'm Jasmine Haley, ICUJP board member. Happy to be here this morning. It's a poem. It says, "Oh, Jamaican girl, where is your patois? Where is your long dreads of natural hair? Your culture, Jamaican girl, sing your country's national anthem. How do you not like reggae? What kind of Jamaican are you? You see Ackee codfish I stuffed down my throat on a Saturday morning would never be enough for them. My instinctive use of the English language, made them stick at their guts. The fact that their waistline won't move in such a manner to alarm others. Born in the yard, grew up in the suburbs, never boastful, always grateful. So, Jamaican girl, you try to act white on purpose. Wear American clothes and perm your hair. My nationality will exist throughout my veins. Will never hit sunlight unless my tongue decides to move in that direction. Will never be ashamed of my heritage, as I am proud of it, yet also modified to not be defined by it." Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jasmine. So this was by Chanel Doyer?
Dior, yes.
Dior.
Yeah.
Do you know much about that poet? She's new to me.
No, she's new to me too.
Okay.
But yes, I want to share it just to shed light on what's going on. It has an impact, but it is a manageable one, and we have to do it together.
Powerful. Thank you so much. Glad you were able to join us at this point.
Yes.
Thank you. At 9:40, 5